The laughter was loud, the jokes were sharp, and Sanford and Son felt like pure television magic. But behind the cameras? The set was a powder keg, loaded with secrets that could ruin reputations, break friendships, and even end careers. Guns were on set, millions vanished. And one of the show's most famous punchlines became a real-life tragedy. What really happened behind TV's funniest junkyard? Let's pull back the curtain. The persona paradox. Before the world knew him as Fred Sanford, Redd Foxx was already a legend. Just not the kind you could watch with your kids. His comedy was raw, fast, and unapologetically adult, packed with language and topics that would have never made it past television censors in the 1970s. He cut his teeth in Harlem's smoky clubs during the 1940s, first as a mime and singer, then as a master of ceremonies in Baltimore. By the late 40s, he was earning $450 a week with fellow comic Slappy White, serious money for a black entertainer at the time. But his big break came almost by accident in 1964, when NBC's Hugh Downs caught his act in San Francisco. Despite concerns about his risque style, Fox was invited onto The Today Show, which opened the floodgates to appearances on The Tonight Show, Mike Douglas, Steve Allen, and more. By the time he hit Las Vegas, he was making $4,000 a week, a king's ransom in those days. When Sanford and Son debuted, it skyrocketed into the top 10 shows in America, and so did Redd's paycheck, $35,000 an episode. But Fox wasn't content. He wanted to make more than Carol O'Connor, the white star of CBS's All in the Family. His demand? $25,000 a week, plus an extra dollar, a symbolic jab to say, I'm worth more. In 1974, that battle came to a head. Fox abruptly walked off the set, officially citing health issues, leaving the writers to awkwardly write Fred Sanford out of 9 episodes over 2 seasons. NBC sued him for $10 million, but Fox knew his worth. The network caved, giving him the higher salary he wanted, and 25% of the show's net profits. But that fight for recognition was only the first sign of how turbulent things could get behind TV's funniest junkyard. The tragic echo, October 11th, 1991. It should have been just another lighthearted day on set. Redd Foxx had landed what could have been his big second act, The Royal Family, a network sitcom with the backing of CBS and produced by Eddie Murphy himself. The project had buzz, the kind of buzz that could pull a veteran star back into the spotlight. That afternoon, during a rehearsal, Redd was in his usual zone, joking with crew, trading quips, making the people around him laugh. Then, without warning, he slowed, put a hand to his chest, and staggered. In any other workplace, the room would have erupted into panic. But here? This was Redd Foxx. This was Fred Sanford, the man who made a career out of clutching his chest and pretending to keel over. The man who could turn a fake heart attack into a punchline America would quote for decades. The crew froze for a moment, and then they laughed. Some even clapped, assuming this was Redd improvising, slipping a bit of his old magic into a rehearsal. He'd done it so many times before. Why wouldn't this be another gag? But the seconds kept ticking. He didn't smirk, he didn't wink, he didn't stand back up. And slowly, the mood shifted. Confusion replaced amusement. A few faces went pale. It dawned on them. This wasn't a joke. By the time anyone rushed to his side and called for help, the damage had been done. Redd Foxx was rushed to Queen of Angels Hollywood Presbyterian Medical Center, but the doctors couldn't bring him back. At just 68 years old, he was gone. The cruel twist? His death played out like the very scene that made him a household name. The exaggerated, "I'm coming, Elizabeth," collapses on Sanford and Son. Only this time, there was no recovery, no applause, no commercial break. It was the ultimate irony. The joke that had kept America laughing for years was also the one that fooled his friends and coworkers in the most tragic way possible. And as the world mourned, another uncomfortable truth began to surface. Even with all the fame, all the paychecks, and all the cultural impact, Redd Foxx's life off-screen was far from secure. In fact, it was about to take a darker turn, riches to ruin. At the height of his career, Redd Foxx was living the Hollywood dream. $35,000 per episode, more than most Americans made in a year, and that was just his TV paycheck. Add to that his Las Vegas headliner fees, comedy tours, guest appearances, and merchandise, and he was pulling in millions. He lived exactly like a man who thought the money would never stop. Multiple homes, each one bigger than the last, A driveway lined with luxury cars, Cadillacs, Rolls-Royces, and sports cars that looked more at home in Beverly Hills showrooms than in a comedian's garage. He had closets full of tailor-made suits, gold jewelry that caught the light, and a taste for fine dining that often meant picking up the check for everyone at the table. And it wasn't just for himself. Redd was known for his generosity, sometimes to a fault. He paid bills for friends who were down on their luck, covered medical costs for family members, and even handed out cash to struggling strangers who recognized him on the street. In his mind, the good times would last forever. But Hollywood's golden tap eventually runs dry. Sanford and Son ended in 1977, and while Redd stayed busy with smaller projects, nothing brought in the same kind of steady, life-changing money. Yet his spending habits never changed. The bills piled up, the debts mounted. By 1983, the unthinkable happened. Redd Foxx filed for bankruptcy. The man who had been one of television's highest-paid stars was now fighting to keep creditors at bay. It was a public fall from grace that shocked fans and made headlines across the country. And then came the knockout blow. In 1989, the IRS came after him with a vengeance. They claimed he owed $2 million in back taxes, plus penalties and interest. The debt was so massive that agents moved in and seized nearly everything he owned. His homes, gone. His prized cars, loaded onto trucks. Even personal items, trophies, and mementos from his career were taken. Neighbors watched in stunned silence as government movers carried out the life he had built. For Redd, it wasn't just about losing possessions. It was the humiliation. The man who once stood toe-to-toe with network executives and demanded top dollar was now watching strangers box up his history. And through it all, he kept performing, kept smiling for the cameras, as if nothing was wrong. But behind that smile was a man battling the reality that fame offers no guarantee of security, and that the same industry that makes you can just as quickly forget you. As the financial pressure mounted, so did the tensions on set. And soon, Sanford and Son would be caught in a behind-the-scenes fight over identity, authenticity, and respect, one that would take the show into dangerous territory, script wars and on-set reality. On screen, Sanford and Son looked effortless, just a quick-witted junk dealer sparring with his exasperated son. But behind the scenes, there was a battle brewing over something bigger than punchlines. Who got to decide what real black life looked and sounded like on TV? Most of the show's writers were white, many of them veterans of other sitcoms. They were talented, but they were outsiders writing about Watts, Los Angeles, a community they didn't live in and didn't fully understand. Their scripts sometimes landed awkwardly with the cast, especially with Redd Foxx and Demond Wilson, who felt the dialogue didn't always ring true. More than once, Foxx pushed back. "Black people don't talk like that," he'd say, blunt and unfiltered. It wasn't just about slang. It was about rhythm, about authenticity, about making sure the show's success didn't come at the cost of stereotyping the very people it was supposed to represent. The tensions peaked during one infamous courtroom scene. Redd wanted to use a racial slur, one that had real weight in the black community, to make the moment hit harder. The studio audience roared with approval when he said it. NBC executives, on the other hand, were horrified. They wanted it cut. Foxx refused, arguing that he could use the word because it came from a place of truth, but others could not. It was a bold move in the early 70s, one that underscored how much he was willing to gamble for authenticity. But creative disputes weren't the only hidden danger on set. In a later interview, Demond Wilson revealed something that shocked fans. He never filmed an episode without being armed. "I was strapped," he said flatly. "Redd, too. You get ignorant, you're gonna get bust on." That revelation painted the Sanford and Son stage in a completely different light. To the millions watching at home, it was a safe, cozy sitcom world. But to the people working there, it was a workplace where the threat of real violence was serious enough that two of its stars kept guns within reach. It was a reminder that the line between Hollywood glamour and harsh reality was razor thin. And for Demond Wilson, the man who played the calm, patient Lamont Sanford, the story behind the smile was even more complicated. Demond Wilson's journey. To millions of viewers, Lamont Sanford was the voice of reason, the long-suffering son trying to keep his father's schemes from spiraling out of control. But the man behind the role, Demond Wilson, had lived a life far more intense and unpredictable than anything shown in a 30-minute sitcom. Before Hollywood, there was Vietnam. From 1966 to 1968, Wilson served in the United States Army as part of the 4th Infantry Division. He fought in the Vietnam War, where he was wounded in combat, an experience that left scars you couldn't always see. It was a world away from the Junkyard in Watts, but the discipline and resilience he learned in uniform would shape him for the rest of his life. Performance was in his blood from an early age. He made his Broadway debut at just 4 years old and danced on the stage of Harlem's Apollo Theater by age 12. That mix of stage talent and real-life grit made him a natural fit for television, but even success came with its own blows. In 1977, when Redd Foxx abruptly left Sanford and Son during a salary dispute, Wilson didn't hear it from his co-star. He found out from a newscaster in the NBC hallway. The shock wasn't just professional, it was personal. The man who played his father on screen hadn't told him the show they built together was essentially over. Wilson later said, "I forgave him and I loved Redd, but I never forgot." That statement says it all. The affection was real, but so was the hurt. Then came one of the most jaw-dropping behind-the-scenes revelations in sitcom history. In an interview years later, Wilson admitted, "I never did an episode when I wasn't strapped. Redd too." Both men carried guns on set, a detail that recasts every lighthearted Junkyard scene with an unsettling undertone. When Sanford and Son ended, Wilson didn't just chase another acting gig. He made a complete life pivot. In 1984, he became an ordained Pentecostal minister. By 1994, he had founded Restoration House, a program offering spiritual counseling, job training, and a second chance for former inmates. It was a calling as intense as his Hollywood career, but rooted in redemption rather than ratings. Wilson also picked up a pen, releasing his memoir Second Banana, the bittersweet memoirs of the Sanford and Son years. The title itself spoke volumes. Second Banana is showbiz slang for the sidekick, the person always in the shadow of the main act. The book was his way of setting the record straight, correcting the rumors, and giving fans a clear-eyed look at what life on Sanford and Son was really like. It was bittersweet, he admitted, a mix of pride in the work and pain over how it ended. But perhaps most of all, it was a reminder that even when the cameras stop rolling, the bonds and the wounds between co-stars can last a lifetime. From fire to faith, on screen, Aunt Esther was the last person you'd expect to have a scandalous past. Bible in hand, voice like a whip, and a glare that could stop Fred Sanford mid-sentence. But before Lawanda Page became the God-fearing, quick-tongued foil to Redd Foxx, she was known by a much more daring name, the Bronze Goddess of Fire. Her act was no metaphor. Lawanda literally played with fire for a living. She lit cigarettes with her fingertips, swallowed flames, and even pressed burning torches against her skin. She admitted she often burned herself during shows, but to her, it was just the price of survival in the entertainment business. In the gritty nightclub circuit, danger paid the bills. When she left the fire act behind, Page reinvented herself as a stand-up comic. And like Fox, she specialized in blue comedy, raunchy, adult-oriented material laced with sharp takes on race, religion, and relationships. One of her albums, Watch It, Sucker, named after Aunt Esther's most famous catchphrase, went gold. But the jokes on that record? Definitely not network approved. Her path to Sanford and Son came with its own drama. Producers were unsure she was ready for television and considered letting her go. That's when Redd Foxx stepped in. He didn't just vouch for her, he issued an ultimatum. Hell no. If she goes, I go. The producers backed down, and Aunt Esther became one of the most beloved and quotable characters in 1970s television. Off-screen, their bond went back decades. Fox and Page grew up together in St. Louis, and their friendship outlasted fame, contracts, and Hollywood politics. Their famous on-screen insults, "You fish-eyed fool," hit a deep personal loyalty that most fans never saw. But fame came with a price. The demands of shooting and touring wore on Lawanda's health, and in later years she battled serious complications from diabetes. She passed away in 2002 at the age of 81. Even in death, rumors followed her. For years, fans believed she was the real-life sister of Lynn Hamilton, who played Donna Harris on the show. The story spread so far, it was even mentioned in her obituary. It wasn't until 2016 that Demon Wilson publicly cleared it up. They weren't sisters, just close friends who'd worked together for years. Lawanda Page's journey, from swallowing fire in back alley clubs to trading zingers with Redd Foxx on primetime TV, was proof that reinvention is possible and that the fiercest on-screen rivalries can be rooted in the deepest real-life friendships. The supporting cast's hidden lives. While Fred, Lamont, and Aunt Esther grabbed most of the laughs, Sanford and Son's world was built on a colorful supporting cast, each actor bringing their own quirks, timing, and life experience to the screen. But off-camera, their real stories were often just as surprising as the show's scripts. Take Whitman Mayo, the lovable Grady Wilson. On the show, Grady was a stooped, slow-moving old man who looked like he'd been around since the Great Depression. In reality, when the series started, Mayo was only in his early 40s, decades younger than his character. He modeled Grady's mannerisms on his own grandfather, right down to the shuffling walk and the absent-minded smile. Before acting, Mayo lived an almost Forrest Gump-like life, serving in the U.S. Army from 1951 to 1953, working as a counselor for troubled boys, picking grapes in California, laboring on railroads, and even spending a year in Mexico as a professional volleyball player. After Sanford and Son, he headlined his own short-lived spin-off, Grady, taught acting at Clark Atlanta University, and even opened a travel agency, proving he wasn't just a sitcom sidekick. Then there was Don Bexley, the ever-loyal Bubba. His real-life loyalty to Redd Foxx ran deep. The two were friends for nearly 50 years before ever appearing on TV together. Bexley had been a seasoned entertainer for decades, working as an orchestra director, dancer, singer, and stand-up comic. He made history as the first black stand-up comedian to perform in New York's famous Borscht Belt hotels. His television career didn't start until Sanford and Son, and it was Fox himself who brought him aboard at age 62. Their bond was so strong that Bexley served as an honorary pallbearer at Fox's funeral. Nathaniel Taylor's Rollo Lawson was Lamont's street-smart best friend, slick, funny, and always hustling. Off-screen, Taylor's life took a sharp turn in 1986 when he and his brother were arrested on burglary charges tied to $200,000 worth of stolen computer equipment. But Taylor eventually turned toward helping others, opening a performing arts studio for young actors in the hopes of steering them away from the kinds of trouble he'd faced. And then there was Lynn Hamilton, the warm, patient Donna Harris, Fred Sanford's on-screen girlfriend and the calm center of the storm. While her role was softer than the others, Hamilton's career was anything but quiet. She trained in Broadway productions, spent years with the New York Shakespeare Festival, and had a steady run of roles in major shows like Good Times, The Waltons, and the miniseries Roots, The Next Generations. Off-screen, she enjoyed a nearly 50-year marriage to poet and playwright Frank Jenkins until his passing in 2014, a rare example of Hollywood stability. Together, these supporting players gave Sanford and Son its texture and heart. And while fans remember their catchphrases and comic timing, their real-life stories reveal lives full of reinvention, resilience, and in some cases, redemption. Fork in the spotlight. For millions of fans, Sanford and Son was pure comfort television, a familiar laugh at the end of a long day. But peel back the curtain and it becomes something far more complicated. A story of ambition and betrayal, of fierce loyalty and quiet heartbreak, of people fighting for authenticity in an industry built on illusion. Redd Foxx, the king of comedy who turned a junkyard into a stage, battled for respect, wrestled with money troubles, and left behind one of the most painfully ironic deaths in television history. Demon Wilson, the dutiful son on screen, carried the scars of war, the weight of personal slights, and a pistol on his hip between takes. Lawanda Page, hiding a fire eater's daring past behind Aunt Esther's Sunday hat, owed her television career to a lifelong friend's refusal to let her be erased. And the rest of the cast, from Grady's quiet wisdom to Bubba's enduring loyalty, proved that even the so-called side characters were living dramas of their own. The truth is, Sanford and Son was never just about a father, a son, and a junkyard. It was about survival in Hollywood, in life, and in the face of an audience that would never know the whole story. And maybe that's the real irony. The laughter that kept America coming back every week was born from a cast carrying secrets, struggles, and battles that no script could ever capture. So the next time you watch Fred Sanford clutch his chest and cry, "I'm coming, Elizabeth," remember, for the people who lived it, the line between comedy and tragedy was thinner than anyone dared to imagine.